Hey, Hammy here, back with part 3 of 4.3 on powering the cell, cellular respiration. Now we're on the last step, is the electron transport chain. We want to take a look. It's very similar to what we discussed in photosynthesis. First off, we take a look at where this happens. Okay, again, this is happening in the mitochondria. You remember the Krebs cycle. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. The Krebs cycle happens in here in the matrix. For the electron transport chain, for the final step now, we're talking on the inner membrane, or sometimes called the cristae because it's got these little folds to increase the surface area. So this is going to take place right on this inner membrane of the mitochondria, and we're going to get those electrons out of NADH and FADH2 and try to turn them into ATP, energy, power for the cell. Okay, the electron transport chain is going to be very similar to how it works like we looked at in photosynthesis earlier in chapter 4. So right here is the cristae membrane. Okay, cristae membrane. Here's the outer membrane of the mitochondria, and we've got this intermembrane space right here. So here comes, over on this side, here comes NADH and FADH2. Okay, remember, they're like electron dump trucks. Okay, so they're going to come, they're going to stop here, drop off their high energy electrons right here. Okay, and as these electrons are passed kind of down this chain, that's why it's called electron transport chain, sort of like we talked about in class, like a hot potato. So as it's passed down, it loses energy. Okay, that energy is used to pump hydrogen ions out here into this space. So the electrons move down the chain. Okay, here's FADH2 coming in a little bit later down the chain. Here's hydrogens. Pump in hydrogen, pump in hydrogen, pump in hydrogen. And pretty soon this whole space in here, this intermembrane space, it starts to get jam-packed full of hydrogen ions. Now remember, all those positive hydrogens do not like being close to each other. Okay, it's usually opposites attract in chemistry. So all these positive ions don't like being squished in that space. Okay, so where's their escape? Okay, well, first we call that a chemiosmotic gradient. Okay, you should be familiar with that term. Very similar here. It's kind of like a form of stored potential energy. Okay, so these hydrogen ions have an escape route. Their escape route is through the enzyme, okay, ATP synthase. Remember, it's a protein channel that acts like an enzyme. Right here is ATP synthase. Okay, so the hydrogen ions can escape through the ATP synthase. As it does, it causes a rotation. There's a little rotor part of that protein that spins, and we say it phosphorylates or adds a phosphate group, inorganic phosphate, to ADP to make ATP. So there is our battery. Our battery is charged. You see over here is between our second and third bond. It's charged up. Okay, so we have NAD, NADH, FAD, FADH2 dropping off electrons. They go down the chain. They pump in hydrogens. The hydrogens escape, spin the rotor of ATP synthase, and we charge up ATP. Okay, the last thing to kind of look at here is what happens with the electrons. Okay, as the electrons are spent or they lose all their energy, okay, they're going to come down here, combine two electrons, going to combine with two hydrogen ions and an oxygen. Okay, so what will that make? Well, two H's and an O. H2O. Okay, so the oxygen, this is why we need to breathe. Okay, we need to breathe to stay alive. We say we need oxygen for cellular respiration. Okay, this is the aerobic part. Okay, why you need oxygen? Oxygen is required at the end of the electron transport chain to accept these spent electrons. Okay, and that turns into water. And if you remember the formula for cellular respiration, water is CO2, and water are the kind of the waste products that are given off. Okay, so that's why we need to breathe. We need this oxygen here at the end of the electron transport chain to accept those electrons. Okay, finally, how much ATP do we get from one molecule of glucose? Well, let's look back at the 3 steps of cellular respiration. Glycolysis, remember we got 2 ATP made directly. Remember we put 2 in, got 4 out, so we got a net gain of 2. The Krebs cycle, okay, also made 2 ATP directly, okay? So there's 2 plus 2, there's 4. Now the electron transport chain, remember we had 10 NADH that entered the electron transport chain, okay, from all these different, from the first 2 steps. And we also had 2 FADH2. Now you remember NADH3 entered the electron transport chain earlier. So each NADH can make 3 ATP. So 3 times 10 gives us a total of 30. FADH2 enters the electron transport chain down further, so it can only make 2 ATP per FADH2. So 2 times 2 is 4. We add those up together. The electron transport chain gives us 34 ATP. Total these up, 34 plus 2 gives us 38, excuse me, 38 ATP from aerobic. In other words, you need the electron transport chain. Okay, so you have to have oxygen as that final electron acceptor. But with oxygen, we can, remember, slowly break down glucose so it doesn't whoosh, give all the energy at once. Okay, and we get 38 ATP. This 38 ATP is what is used to power our cell for muscle contraction, thinking, nerve impulses, and all that. Okay. The next part of the chapter, we're going to take a look at what happens if oxygen is not present and our body still needs energy. What happens?